Well, our expectations are that we move, from words to action, because clearly, we now only have years to turn around. And what we are doing in the World Future Council, we are helping policymakers worldwide by identifying best policies, institutions, rules, which work somewhere. And we also have an award for these, the Future Policy Award, and that's of course now become part of COP. It was so in Nagoya, and it is now here again in Hyderabad. We identify for every year we identify in a different area. So then it was biodiversity in Nagoya, last year it was forests, and this year it's oceans, best laws and policies to protect oceans and coastlines. And we will be presenting this award tomorrow as part of the program here. So basically what we are doing is, we use established criteria to check these policies, make sure they actually work, make sure that they have positive effects for current and future generations, and then it's just for the policymakers to implement them. So, that work is being done. We know what the solutions are, we know what can be done, what needs to be done, because it's already being done somewhere. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's basically is our role here, and that's why we're always, excited to be here.
When we talk about that the policies and the negotiations haven't really translated into real activities much, what do you think is the biggest problem? What is the roadblock?
Well, I think, you have very good goals, and you have a lot of people who are very well-meaning, but if you need consensus, then of course that's always a problem. And I think there's also still a sort of lack of urgency in many of the negotiations. And we are of course trying to install, that urgency. And we know we have many allies there in many countries. And as I said, there are policies like tomorrow we are honoring the policy of Palau, the Pacific nation of Palau, on marine protection, on banning shark fishing. These are just two examples of. There are many policies, the Aichi goals, which were decided in Nagoya, is all there. But how do you get there? The specifics of how you get there. And people often think, oh, well, it'll somehow happen automatically, best practices. Now, best practices will not do it unless they are supported by the right policy incentives. And these policy incentives obviously need to be spread, need to be speeded up much faster.
So at the international level, we've seen how climate change policies have been heavily criticized for having been influenced by political economics, where political interests have sort of ruined the potential benefit that could have come out. Do you see political economy can also influence the biodiversity talks here?
Oh yes, well, first of all, of course, we are here, with politicians. These are political issues, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also, one has to say, probably in defense of politicians, that very few realized how seriously the problems would grow, how fast they would grow. The pessimists have been right. So basically, one can say it's a political failure. It's also a market failure. The market is not sending out the right signals. It's also a media failure. The media have not researched and reported properly, and been, often too focused on a small minority of so-called skeptics, especially when it comes to climate. But biodiversity also, of course, the issues are complex, the issues are global. We need, coherent policy responses. Yes, are there economic issues? Yes, of course. But I mean, the economic costs of not acting, as we know, are very soon going to be much more massive, and in fact, completely unsustainable. And this is, of course, one always has to remind people that this is not some kind of nature, isn't like some kind of luxury. It's the basis for human development. It's the basis for economic growth. Without it, you're not going to have any of that. We're going to have collapse. We're going to have increasing natural catastrophes, making the increasing parts of the planet uninhabitable. It's as serious as that.
Sir, we all will agree to the fact that enough study and research and policies have been made and kept. Translating it to a mass appealing thing by means of education programs is something that we need, and Aichi target number 1 also focuses on it. But still it has not gone too far. What do you think policies need to focus on to ensure Aichi target number 1 is achieved specifically in the context of developing countries like India?
Well, I think one big issue here is, of course, oceans, and is the question of fish. If we continue like this with the overfishing, I mean, we're soon going to end up not having any fish anymore, and this is, of course, a major catastrophe for huge number of the global population. We are disinheriting future generations, and so spreading marine protected areas, protecting oceans and coastlines, is an absolute must, and it's not the most difficult target to reach. There are other biodiversity targets, other climate targets, which are going to be even harder to reach. But so let's at least have some progress, some really tangible progress on this, because as I said, the best policies do exist. We have looked at policies in Namibia, very, very good fisheries policy there, which was introduced to turn around the situation before independence there, where foreign fishing boats were basically catching as much as they wanted, and now this is very strictly regulated, so you do need to have this kind of regulation. We've looked at policies in the Philippines, also in South Africa, also in California, so which we are all mentioning and honoring tomorrow. So they do exist in many, many areas. Last year it was forestry, there was a policy from Rwanda. The year before in Nagoya it was biodiversity. The biodiversity law of Costa Rica of 1998 is also exemplary. So yeah, you do need education about these policies, but above all, of course, you need to educate policymakers, and you need to help. We need to create a lobby for the future. The World Future Council sees itself as basically as a lobby for the future, speaking up as a voice of future generations. And we have to remember that in ancient times, here in India is a very good example, in this part of India, in pre-colonial times, there existed councils of seers into the future. Politicians in those days, when they took decisions, they were guided by these councils not to take decisions which could harm future generations. You had similar institutions in the Arab world, in Africa, in North America, among native Northern Americans. They had the seventh generation principle: don't do anything which will harm the seventh generation to come. Today, we have much more effect. Our actions and our non-actions, our decisions and non-decisions have much more effect on future generations for much longer time periods than our ancestors' decisions could have had. And still, we have sort of seemed to have given up on including future generations' rights in our decision making. Although everybody would agree when you ask them, do you have one common value worldwide? And everybody will agree, yes, I want to hand over a better world, or at least not a worse world, to my children. Well, then let's create the policy framework and the institutional framework which make sure that we do exactly that.
Coming back to the World Future Council initiative of the Future Policy Awards, tell us more about it. Is it going to be an international award, or will it have regional chapters? How will it be, and what specific parameters and benchmarks will you be considering to find out? And do you really hope that it will have multiplier effect in spreading the word of sustainability?
Well, I think that's the only way to do this. We started looking at food security. We found there was a policy in Brazil, in the city of Belo Horizonte, where everybody had the right to a healthy meal a day. It has reduced child mortality by 60%, reduced hunger and malnutrition by 75%, at a cost of 2% of the city's budget, which I'm sure is much cheaper and much faster than many aid programs would have achieved. So quite often a law is the quickest way to affect change. And yeah, so now of course we are working very hard to make sure that this law spreads, and we need partners to do this, because clearly you need to adapt it, you need to bring it to other countries, to different political situations. But that's what we're also working on, the biodiversity law, the forestry law, the oceans law, working to spread it. We had a hearing on the forestry law, for example, in Rwanda about the Rwandan law, and we're now planning another hearing there in Africa, and we hope to do the same, of course, with the oceans law. We're looking for partners there to make sure that these laws from Palau, Philippines, Namibia, that they are multiplied. It's the only way, and we have, of course, we do our research according to criteria developed by the International Law Association, which were adopted, at the Johannesburg conference. So we don't pull these policies out of the hat. These are not my or the council's personal preferences.